Here's a question for you. Were the lockdowns of early 2020 a mistake? The date of this recording is June 10th, and the short answer to the question is this. It's still a little too early to medically assess all the policies which were adopted and followed. Now, how about economically? Is it too early to try to figure that out? There's currently way more economic data than medical data at this date, and the verdict here at this point in history is looking pretty grim about the lockdowns. They really did not help the economy. And we'll have a lot more on that in coming podcasts. But on the medical front, lockdown debates have gone strangely quiet, as have speculations on the best public health strategies. And this comes after 5 frantic months of argument, speculation, blame, denial, and uncertainty. So, has enough time passed, from December, January, February, and on up to here in June? Has enough time passed since the breaking of the virus news to assess international response to the virus? The current consensus give most nations a poor grade. And that's not surprising because, granted, dependable data and testing data was either missing or unreliable or tainted by media and politics and cover-up. It was really hard to get good data. On May the 5th, the British medical journal The Lancet posted a letter from a Swedish specialist on infectious diseases. He was willing, at that point, May 5th, to go out on a limb with an assessment and a prediction simply based on the latest numbers from April. And this is really interesting. This is what I want us to focus in on. How did he do it? I want you to assess what you hear here. Did he do a good job? Is it an accurate assessment? Is it responsible, what he's doing? See what you think of his analysis. The reason we're doing this exercise is because the year 2020 is shaping up to be one of mental and moral scrambling. We're going to have to stay light on our feet. We get new sets of data on everything every day. The ground seems to be shifting beneath our feet every week. And so we cannot just sit back and watch what is happening passively. We must assess small portions of information that we can put our hands on and act decisively about it and try to help our confused friends and neighbors who are getting more and more nervous about the future every week. So the author of this article, Giesecke, shows us how to do the best one can do with what little information one has. He employed the scientific method, which is basically what we will need to be doing with all the information we get about anything. And what that includes is systematic observation, really careful, calm, systematic observation, and then measurement, and then experiment, and then the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses, which is a premise that we come up with after we've observed these things and tested and done our formulations. So Giesecke gathered as much fresh information as he could from the best available data in Sweden, he's from Sweden, and about Sweden, and deduced a hypothesis. So what is a hypothesis? Let me just define that real quick. And deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning relies on a general statement or hypothesis, sometimes called a premise or a standard, that's held to be true. All right? The premise is used to reach a specific logical conclusion. So here is Giesecke's premise, and it's really a 3-part premise. See if you agree with him. The lockdowns, he said, are a bad idea politically because they suppress people's freedoms. They are a bad idea economically. They have pushed the world into a recession which threatens to turn into a depression. And then Giesecke is saying the lockdowns are also a bad idea medically, that they will not significantly lower the death rate among older people who are the most vulnerable. And he formulated this premise in late April in Sweden, where the schools and most businesses and workplaces remained open, and police officers were not chasing everybody down and checking everybody's errands in the street. And severe critics have described this Swedish policy as actually murderous. They've used that term. They've said Sweden is sacrificing its elderly citizens to quickly reach herd immunity. And we have to stop here and admit that there have been critics on every side of every argument, even changing sides and then changing back. Even the president's COVID task force has flipped several times on the advice that they were giving to the president, making his job really difficult, really frustrating. Going on with Giesecke, here's a quote. The death toll has surpassed our three closest neighbors, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, but the mortality remains lower than in the UK, Spain, and Belgium. It has become clear that a hard lockdown does not, and this is what he says in his conclusions at the end of April, it has become clear that a hard lockdown does not protect old and frail people living in care homes, a population the lockdown was designed to protect. Neither does it decrease mortality from COVID-19, which is evident when comparing the UK's experience with that of other European countries. One national strategy that no country is willing to adopt is herd immunity, is what Giesecke says. And that's what Sweden was trying to experiment with and do. It assumes, he says, that the population will rapidly develop an immunity. Those members of the population who don't develop an immunity will get sick and die. And so his hypothesis, after all this study and his writing, and that he's putting out there publicly, is this, quote, I expect that when we count the number of deaths from COVID-19 in each country 1 year from now, and it's 1 year from May the 5th, the figures will be similar regardless of measures taken. And so that's his hypothesis. Do you think he's right? Do you think he'll be proven to be right? So that was in May 5th. How about June the 5th, just 1 month from then? The data continues to pour in from every country, and even from Sweden. And Sweden's death rate happened to be, by June the 5th, 10 times higher than its neighbors by the end of May. Okay? And so we're getting new data about his hypothesis. Economist Gary North comments on Giesecke's paper, and North too is using deductive reasoning. Follow with me his thinking and see what you think. Quote, from an economic standpoint, Giesecke is implicitly saying that the lockdowns are creating an economic disaster, but they will prove to have been ineffective a year from now with respect to limiting the percentage of deaths. This assumes that immunities are comparable in various nations. Okay, so North is telling us, yes, he's done his work, he's done his hypothesis, he's done his experimentation with theories, and he's made a hypothesis, but it assumes, and Gary North is right, that immunities are comparable in various nations. It assumes that the virus does not mutate. It assumes that humidity is not a significant factor in the spread of the disease. In other words, it assumes a lot of things that may not be true. He is just one more expert offering his opinion. And Gary North is right, end quote. But it is a carefully reasoned opinion based on available data. So what is your carefully reasoned and informed opinion? I mean, we really cannot remain passive when there are decisions to be made about what we do. Are you waiting for others to do your thinking for you and to chart the course of your life for you? Or are you willing to act now on the information you have carefully researched yourself? And we've got access to information that the media is not showing us because we have access to the internet and to different scientists who are publishing in different areas and providing for us information that we can look at. One prominent weak point in the world's early response to this COVID crisis was citizen input to the government. Most citizens worldwide simply sat around expecting the experts to know what was best, not offering informed opinions on their preferences or will. And it's foolish for us to just shoot from the hip and give our opinions to our governor or our president if they're uninformed opinions. But if we do have some informed opinions, we should be. And some doctors organize themselves to send medical advice to their governors. And And a lot of that information and that advice was responsible and proactive. But how well had they really been able to think it through? Well, with the available data they had, they did as well as they could. In our state, there were 200 doctors who put their heads together and looked at the data coming out of China, out of Spain, out of Italy, and it was really dark and bleak data. Lots of deaths happening. Hospitals were overrun. And so these doctors begged our governor to do a comprehensive lockdown. And our governor looked at their information, looked at their data, but he also weighed some additional voices, as did our president, as did other decision makers, other CEOs around the country. And so here's what I want to challenge you with today. The next stage of decisions will likely come when we're hit with that autumn wave of infection, if there is a reinfection. We don't know at the time of this recording if it will come, but let me just direct your attention to, there's a website that has a rolling 7-day average that can be monitored by anyone, and it's not being monitored as well as it should be by as many people. It's ourworldindata.org, ourworldindata.org/coronavirus. And what we can see from there is that infection is up in some places and it's down in others at this point of this recording. So I ask this, after a summer of rioting, will there be more infection? We don't know yet. After a summer of rioting and rebuilding storefronts, how many citizens will submit to another mandatory lockdown? And if there are no police to enforce it, will there be any lockdowns? Who will be the voices of reason who lead your state through the next crisis of rioting or medical infection or the lack of police or the crumbling economy? Who will be there? Whose voice can be trusted? And I would like for you to be able to learn to do the kind of deductive reasoning you need to, even with incomplete data, to try to give the very best advice you can and make the very best plans you can for your family and for your community. You and your voice needs to be engaged in giving reliable options on the way forward. And you can do that, and you can just say, it's the very best option I can think of, Governor. Please consider it among the other ones that you're looking at. And so please do be willing to provide your legislators and your governor a voice of stability and reason based on careful deductive reasoning. They represent you. And what is it you think will be the correct course of action in COVID-19 2.0 if it starts sending people to the hospitals? We should be thinking about this. Like Giesecke, we too can think with orderly analysis, doing the best we can with incomplete data. So a month after Giesecke's paper, we know Sweden did see a spike in May deaths. The chief epidemiologist admitted he would have handled April differently in hindsight, but he didn't have hindsight at that time. And it will be another 11 months before we can fully test Giesecke's hypothesis fully against the final numbers. But in the meantime, what must be prepared for the next few months? All right. The Spanish flu of 1918 died out during the summer, but then returned with a vengeance in the fall, entered its genocidal sweep. If this does happen with COVID, we don't know how opportunistic politicians will try to use the crisis for deliberate ends or whether they will simply be frozen in paralysis. So how can we be letting them know that we're watching the situation, gathering good data, thinking carefully, not simply expecting them to do everything, but expecting them to be responsive to input? The safest prediction from all the medical and political data we have is this, and here's my conclusion. COVID-19 is sneaky and new and preys most on the old and weak. Politicians are sneaky and opportunistic and prey on the gullible and unproductive. In the next several years, this combination will make our future highly unstable and highly unpredictable. But this is a prediction we can work with. If we know the prediction, we can see it, and we can see it clearly, and we know that the future's unpredictable, well, that's a prediction I can work with, you can work with. We can expect both influences, the bad germs and the bad politicians, to harm us and destabilize our plans. And knowing this, we can prepare ourselves to respond with life-saving and life-giving recommendations to our leaders. And we need to replace them if they are irresponsible and unresponsive. And we need to be modeling responsibility at the local level and making life-giving recommendations to our neighbors. I appreciate the quote, "The best way to predict the future is to create it, and the best way to create the future is to take local leadership." We will be exploring this in much more detail in coming podcasts.
If you like content like this, please consider subscribing. If you know others who would benefit from this material, please share it with them. To connect with us directly, please visit jeffreybotkin.com and send any questions or thoughts that you might have to questions@jeffreybotkin.com.